Good day, everybody. This is Gary Fielder regarding the O'Rourke v. Dominion Voting Systems, Inc. et al. Case, now in the 10th Circuit, on appeal from the District Court in the District of Colorado. This is a public video, not necessarily made for the clients, but for public consumption. And in that regard, I'm somewhat reserved in my comments, but I wanted to give everybody an update on the situation because it has been some time since our last video. Part of that is because of my own personal circumstances and situation. I actually got COVID, and I can talk about that just for a little bit because of the experience that I personally had, which wasn't pleasant. I'm 58 years old, and my children tested positive in early October. One of my children went to a school-sanctioned camp site and camping situation with the class and other teachers, and came back, and many of the children tested positive. It even made the news, and a lot of the parents got sick, and then I got sick, and it was about 2 weeks of not very pleasant sickness. I was very tired. I couldn't get up. I was literally sleeping 22 hours a day. I could get up for a couple of hours in the middle of the day and think to myself, well, I don't know how I could go back to sleep. And then 2 hours later at 11 o'clock in the morning, I was back sleeping and couldn't get up throughout the whole evening and all the way into the next day. And this went on for a couple of weeks. So this sort of ruined my October. And about October, I'd say 20th, I started feeling a little better. But then it was a full week to be able to get back to work and to be able to meet clients again and go to court again. So that was sort of a harrowing experience. And I'm fully back now, and I feel great. And my immune system is probably as strong as it's ever been, and I'm back on track. So in that regard, I apologize for any delay. The opening brief, for those of you that don't know, in the 10th Circuit has been filed, and it was filed in the middle of September, and it was up on our website. And we've taken down the website to sort of revamp it and update the situation on what's been happening and make sure that everybody's fully advised and informed in that regard. And so just to retrace a little bit, for those of you that don't know, but many of you know the timeline, we filed the complaint in December of 2020. It's coming up on 11 months now, and it'll be our 1-year anniversary on December 22nd of this year from filing the case. After we served many of the parties, some motions to dismiss started to roll in, and we battled it out with Dominion Voting Systems, Facebook, Center for Technology and Civic Life, which we call CTCL. We weren't able to serve Mark Zuckerberg despite multiple efforts, and his wife Priscilla Chan. We weren't able to personally serve them, although we mailed notice to the Governor and Secretary of State of Georgia, the Governor and Secretary of State of the Commonwealth of Virginia, the Governor and Secretary of State of Michigan, and the Governor and the Wisconsin Election Commission. We call them WEC. We mailed notice of the complaint to all of those individuals, and the attorney generals from Georgia, Michigan, and Pennsylvania all responded, and that's sort of a different story in and of itself. And Wisconsin basically just sort of ignored us. These are all interesting stories, and they all have a backdrop, and they all have a legal explanation and a strategic explanation. And I've really been wanting to do about a 2-hour presentation, which we're planning and we will come out with by the new year, about the whole year. And we're planning that. And whether we're going to do it in a public fashion or a private fashion, we're going to come out with, it's going to be at least 2 hours of what happened on the night of the election on into the morning, what our research indicated, what our correspondence was, what our research was, what the first complaint was all about, how we went through a process of serving the parties and their motions to dismiss, their Rule 11 letters. The whole story is just a fascinating story. And I really, frankly, can't wait to tell it. But it's still developing. We're not at a breaking point, really, in the story, because the response briefs from CTCL, Facebook, and Dominion Voting Systems were all due in the middle of October. And it was right when I was sick. But all three of those parties requested a 30-day extension, and now their response briefs are due on November 19th. Now again, I think most of you know this, but we dismissed out the governors and secretaries of state from those swing states of Georgia, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. And again, the whole story is sort of fascinating, but we dismissed them out last April. But Michigan and Pennsylvania followed up even after the dismissal with motions for sanctions, along with Facebook, CTCL, and Dominion, requesting that the court sanction myself and co-counsel Ernie Walker for allegedly filing a frivolous lawsuit. Once the case was dismissed in April, we filed a notice of appeal, and as I said, we filed our opening brief, and their response brief is due. And that is with regard to the sole issue of the standing of the plaintiffs. And of course, we say we have standing, and the basis of that is when one's constitutional rights are violated, that is the damage. And it has to be at least $1. If your constitutional rights are violated, that is the damage. You don't have to show a broken neck, and you don't have to show any financial loss. You don't have to really establish damages in the classic sense. If your constitutional rights are violated, that is the damage. What are the constitutional rights that were violated? Well, as we've come to find out over the process of our case, the right to vote is more than just that one right to vote. It's really a First Amendment right of expression. So there's our clients' First Amendment rights to express themselves through a political process. It's a due process rights. Everybody has a right to due process. And when you vote, your vote should be counted as one vote. And every legal vote should be counted, and the winner should win. So if votes are being flipped, or if votes are not being counted, or as we've come to learn over this process, phantom votes are counted, or other votes which aren't real votes and are tagged to registered voters, that's a phantom vote. That registered voter didn't vote, but some ballot is attached to that registered voter. Not all registered voters are alive. Not all registered voters are even real. And we're learning that process, that a lot of the so-called registered voters aren't real people, but a ballot is being attached to that sort of fake registration. This is all part of what took place over the 2020 presidential election. And to repeat that part, although most voters are limited to voting for issues that are happening in their respective states. For example, if you're from Texas, you're going to be voting for your mayor in your town, or your county commissioner, or your sheriff in your local community, or maybe your U.S. senator, but from the state of Texas, or maybe your U.S. House representative, but still from your district in the state of Texas. Well, if you're from Alaska, none of those individuals in the Texas ballot, no matter what county you're living in, are going to be on the Alaska ballot. Only one election is a national election. Only one election affects every voter, and that's the presidential election. So that's why we focused on the 2020 presidential election, and that dovetails into our position with regard to our standing. Because if actions are being taken in Georgia which affect the presidential election, well, that affects people from Alaska or Washington or Ohio or Hawaii or California or Texas or New Mexico and every other state, particularly if that action in Georgia is enough to sway a swing state. And that's why we focused on the swing states of Georgia, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, because the actions that took place in those 4 states might be actions that took place in other states, and that might still be actionable, but in the end, by focusing on those swing states, we focused on the real culprits. And they weren't just the governors and secretaries of state of those states, but they were primarily CTCL, Facebook, and Dominion voting systems. So there are others involved. We named what we call DOEs 1 through 10,000 to later add those individuals, but once the case was dismissed, we've been in the appellant process since that time, and there aren't going to be any added defendants unless we win the appeal and are sent back to the district court. So we wanted to revamp the website. We sort of wanted to wait until the response briefs are out, but we wanted to do this video just to update everybody that our website is going to be reposted, sort of updated, if you will, away from what was happening in the district court and more focused on what's happening in the 10th Circuit. Once CTCL, Facebook, and Dominion file their response briefs, we'll be working on our reply briefs, and then we'll be focused on scheduling the matter for oral arguments thereafter, which may take place sometime in January or February of next year. So we really should be in the middle of discovery right now. And just think about that. Had we not been dismissed, we would be in the middle of our case. We would have tens of thousands, if not literally millions, of prospective class members. The class would have been certified by now. We would be sending out interrogatories. We would be conducting depositions. We would be getting to the heart of this matter. And that's the primary reason that we believe the case was dismissed, because there was no way that the federal judge, the magistrate in our case, was going to let us get that far. Now, I'm not complaining or criticizing the judge. I'm being reserved in my comments. However, he did find that Mr. Walker and I filed a frivolous lawsuit, and we did no such thing. The magistrate found that we didn't research it enough, or we didn't talk to the experts enough, or we didn't do this, or we didn't do that. And everything that the magistrate alleged is, with all due respect, appealable and, from our humble position, untrue. We exercised due diligence. We researched all the issues. We didn't cross-examine and question every expert, but in that regard, none of that would have made any difference. Do you think that calling, let's say, for example, Dr. Franks, you think calling him and yelling at him on the telephone and saying, "Is everything you're saying true? Are these under oath affidavits that you're filing in all these court cases? Are you lying about that?" Do you think he would have broke down crying and said, "Yes, I'm lying. I'm so sorry. I never should have done any of that"? No, he would have said, "Yeah, I filed the reports and they're real and that's how I feel," particularly after I've watched 10 of his interviews or 15 of his interviews. Why do I need to call him? And I did call him, and we had a very nice telephone conversation. But why I didn't cross-examine him and I didn't call him a liar? Well, I guess the magistrate wanted me to call every expert that we cited and make sure that they weren't lying, to do our due diligence to make sure that they weren't lying. Well, I don't see any of those experts who are still sticking with their story to this day. I don't see any of those experts just taking my call and admitting to me privately that they're really lying. And had I done that, I would have never filed this lawsuit, because I would have figured out that they're all lying. Since he called not just the lawyers frivolous, He called all the evidence frivolous. He called the Navarro report frivolous. He called the Russell Rumsland frivolous. If I would have called Mr. Rumsland and said, hey, are you really telling the truth? Are you just lying? Do you really think he would have told me on the phone? Yeah, I'm really lying, but I'm just doing this for the money. You really think he would have said that? Well, I've watched a dozen of his interviews, and I've read all of his reports, many of which are under oath, many of which are up in other court cases, and I made the judgment that he was telling the truth, and we cited to his report in the complaint. Now, this is before his deposition. This is before his actual expert report would be due in the case, and that's if we wanted to call him at all, because there are a number of different experts, all of whom could opine on the different reports that have been filed, but that would have been all down the line after a year of discovery, and we should be in the middle of that now. If we were in the middle of discovery now, we'd be a long way in determining actually what happened in the 2020 presidential election. Instead, just like I said in the very first video I made some 9 to 10 months ago, at that time I felt like we were a breath away from a civil war. And now I don't see how that's going to be avoided. I really don't know. I'm not suggesting any violence. I'm talking from a sociological, historical perspective. If I had to predict what was going to happen, I just want you all who are listening to this video to imagine where we're going to be 9 months from now, in August or September of 2022, with the midterms 2 months away. If all of these voting irregularities aren't resolved by that time, do you think anyone's going to have any faith in the election that's going to take place less than a year from now? Do you think anyone is going to put up with it? And do you think there's not going to be false flags? Do you think there's not going to be infiltrators? Do you think there's not going to be provocateurs? Do you think that violence isn't going to be blamed on one group of people when it was caused by another group of people? Do you not see all of that coming down the line? Do you think the president and vice president that we have now are even going to be in office? Not saying that Donald Trump's going to replace them, from their own party, from the rumblings that are happening right now. Do you even think they're going to make it to the end of the year of 2021? If we were in the process of prosecuting our case, then I could safely say that all of that would be avoided, because we would get to the truth in a civil, legal manner. But since all of the truth is being suppressed, and since no information is really getting out of there, is getting out into the mainstream, and since evidence is actively being destroyed, and others like our clerk Tina Peters from Mesa County, her house or her offices or something to that effect were just raided a couple of days ago. I just see this escalating. I see this devolving. I see this going in a very difficult situation for everybody to be involved in. So I just feel like we were right from the beginning, and I feel like that our case is still righteous and that we're going to fight for it. And we've said this throughout, that we're not backing down. And so my law license is on the line. My financial future is on the line. The court sanctioned us, and although that is on appeal now as well, the court never issued an order with regard to the attorney's fees that the other attorneys requested, which is close to $200,000. So that order hasn't been issued, and now that it's on appeal, I'm not sure if the court's going to follow up on that or stay that matter until after the appeal. We'll all have to see on that. But one of the things that I really think is unfathomable, I think it's just unbelievable that Dominion Voting Systems, Facebook, CTCL, all are filing response briefs with regard to a class action lawsuit concerning the 2020 presidential election in the 10th Circuit of the United States Court of Appeals, and it's crickets. Not a word. And not that I'm seeking publicity. That's the whole point. I'm not out there actively seeking interviews. I'm just a lawyer representing clients and filing my pleadings. But how could this not be a matter of public interest? Why aren't podcasters, radio talk show hosts, journalists, political scientists, sociologists, and other individuals that are interested in the 2020 presidential election talking about this case? Why aren't they talking about the Constitution? Why aren't they talking about due process? Why aren't they talking about equal protection, which I really didn't get into, but that's another aspect. How do you have a billionaire funnel a bunch of money only into certain counties, and even though it's state by state, that's a lack of equal protection for the voters in each one of those states. And of course, that spills over into the national election of the president and the vice president. So we're talking about the right to vote, the right of political expression, the right of due process, the right of equal protection, all of those rights. Is anyone talking about the Constitution? Is anyone talking about the power of a class action? Is anyone talking about the standing that voters have to come to court and demand justice? I don't hear a word about it. But Ernie and I are the ones under the gun, so we're just flying under the radar. Do you think that I want rocks thrown through my window? Do you think I want my law office raided by FBI agents? I spent most of the summer keeping my family together and keeping them safe and dealing with all of the issues that come along with putting yourself out there. So I quite frankly don't want publicity. And if you really think about it, even though we don't try to have Telegram followers or we're not really on social media, we make these videos, we file our pleadings, we prosecute the case in the best way that we can. But do you think any of that makes a difference with regard to the ruling that the 10th Circuit is going to make? And if they find that we have no standing, that the Supreme Court of the United States is going to have to make? Of course, they could deny review, and we could go back to the district court with our hat in our hand, and I guess the sanctions will stand. But do you really think that having 1 million Telegram followers is going to make a difference? Do you think if I'm on Steve Bannon's radio show that that's going to make a difference? It's not going to make a hill of beans of difference. We either have standing and we're going to win and we're going to go back to court and we're going to prosecute this case as it should have been prosecuted, or the 10th Circuit's going to find that we have no standing and the Supreme Court's either going to accept review and support that decision, accept review and say we have standing, or deny certiorari and leave it alone. So we don't know what's going to happen. All we know is that we're probably going to be back here a year from now with regard to our case. If the 10th Circuit supports us, I would predict that the defendants would appeal to the United States Supreme Court. If the 10th Circuit denies our request for relief, we're definitely going to the United States Supreme Court. So all that takes time. So I predict that probably no matter what, on this simple issue of standing, we're still going to be in the appellate courts even in October or November of next year. So we're in the fight. This is a long process. We're not giving up. We're trying to keep ourselves safe. We're trying to keep our families together. I'm trying to keep my small practice alive and be able to pay my expenses. I'm getting grieved. I have the Bar Association down my throat. But as I'm finding out, lawyers all over the country who are not necessarily filing similar cases, but if you file an unpopular case, your lawyer's going to be sanctioned. That's the new lawfare. That's the class action lawsuit that Mike Lindell and his attorneys filed in the District of Colorado against Dominion Voting Systems just 2 months ago in September of 2021, a class action lawsuit against Dominion. What are the claims? Due process, First Amendment, equal protection, and RICO. The exact same causes of action that we filed in our class action lawsuit. So, how are we frivolous? It all remains to be seen. All I know is that we're going to continue the fight. We're going to continue to do our job. And if we get no publicity, well then good, so be it. It's not going to make any difference anyways. We're either right or we're wrong. But we're not frivolous no matter what, because we certainly think we're right, and we think that we're going to prove that we're right, and we think we're going to win these appeals, and we're going to go back and we're going to prosecute this case. So we just ask everybody to hang in there with us, and if you're against us, well then I guess you're just against us, and if you're for us, well then I guess you're for us. So what more can we do but defend the Constitution and try to defend our clients who are brave enough to join this fight with us. So thanks everybody, and we'll check in a couple of weeks after their response briefs have been filed, and apparently Mike Lindell and his lawyers are filing a big pleading in the Supreme Court. We'll be reviewing those pleadings and keeping everybody updated on that situation as well. And thank you very much. Appreciate it.